we're here to talk all things Warren Legacy Foundation for Paranormal Research. I want to get into that to begin with. Tell me a little bit about the Warren Legacy Foundation, why you started it, what you guys do. I've looked into it. It's very extensive and it's a really cool thing that you guys are doing.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Well, uh, for those people who don't know, I'm the grandson of Ed Lorraine Warren. And after the first Conjuring movie came out, you have to understand, I've been doing this work since 1980, very
Mhm.
quietly. In
Yes.
the early years, I was very public, did lectures and talk shows. I didn't like it at all. So I got away from that. But after the first movie came out, we were getting requests for help from all over the world. And I went to my grandmother and I said, Graham, you know, nobody's ever heard of New England in places like Mongolia, but there's still a need there.
Hmm.
Everywhere in the world has heard of Ed and Lorraine Warren. I want to keep your work going and I want to expand it around the world. I'd been a Peace Corps volunteer in my early years in Africa. So I had had some experience already working with international organizations. I spent another several years working with volunteers. So I already had some background for that. My grandmother loved the idea. She loved the idea of expanding our mission and helping people everywhere. And that's how the foundation was born.
Awesome. Yeah, I've watched a couple of your interviews and I'm not surprised that when you say that you did not enjoy doing the talk shows and being you seem very, very down to earth. I've seen you don't like being referred to as, celebrity. You're just a normal guy,
No.
which I think
Yeah,
is
exactly.
absolutely awesome. So when all of that attention started, was it the same thing for your grandparents as well, where they didn't necessarily like the
No,
spotlight at first?
not at all. Actually, it was quite the opposite. You have to understand, they had been experiencing the paranormal since the 1930s
Hmm.
as children. And when they finally met when they were 16, it was kismet, And as soon as my grandfather got out of the army, they started investigating ghostly hauntings. They didn't even
Hmm.
believe in anything like demons at that point. But they formed the New England Society for Psychic Research in 52,
Hmm.
and nobody had ever even heard of them until their first book came out in 69. It was called Deliver Us from Evil. You can only find it now on Amazon. Some woman somehow has control over this book and sells it
Huh.
there.
Interesting. That's interesting.
But anyway, so no, when my grandparents finally broke through and were getting recognized, I think the very first time was probably the Lindley Street case in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And that was, I think, 72. That was bad. Bad because they had no idea what they were doing when it came to publicity. And they ended up locking up everything in Bridgeport, downtown Bridgeport. There were thousands of cars jammed into this little area, blocking the local hospital and everything else. The police were very unhappy, but it was the first time they ever got exposure. And then after Amityville happened, that was it. They became world famous
Hmm.
and they loved the attention. Honestly, my grandmother, going to the grocery store with my grandmother in town could still take 3 or 4 hours because if somebody wanted to talk to her, she would stop and talk until they were done talking. I mean, she just was the most open, wonderful lady in the world.
Yeah, that's how my grandpa is, which I look up to him so much. He's the reason I got into sports and wrestling and all that. We always joke, my grandpa has never met a stranger. He's never met somebody he doesn't know. He's friends with everybody, and my mom's the same way. If I don't, and I know, Mom, you're listening to this. If I don't have an hour to talk sometimes, you just sometimes, yeah, it takes us, they're special people when they're so open and talkative. You just never met a stranger. And those are some of the most special people ever. They're just
Yeah,
so amazing, you
yeah.
know.
She was amazing. I mean, shit, we'd be in a restaurant, and all of a sudden, my grandmother would be up making the rounds to every single table. I'm like, Graham, what are you doing? Just sit down. Hello, my name's Lorraine Warren. How are you? I'm just here seeing my grandson. Graham, sit.
And that's got to make you uncomfortable too, because I mean, and even now in a tough like you seem very just you're just a normal person. You don't seem like you like that attention. So that
No.
has to make you uncomfortable as well. It's like, can we please eat? Please, can we
Yeah,
please?
well, not only that, I mean, people treat me with respect because I've got grandparents. The last time I checked, everybody's got grandparents.
Yes. Yes, exactly. Um, One thing that I think is really cool is you teach a lot of you lead a lot of virtual classes, and there's a lot of different
Yep.
subjects that you do the virtual classes on. When we were talking about setting this up, you mentioned that you teach throughout the week. Is that what you're referring to, or do you teach in-person classes as well? What all do you do as far as teaching?
Well, I do so many things. I wear a lot of hats.
Hmm.
I don't like to label myself because I think
Same.
labels are inherently limiting.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
we love to put things in little boxes, but once you put it in a box, that's all it is. And
Mhm.
I don't agree with that.
Yes.
I do one-on-one courses with people. We talk about whatever. I treat it like I'm dealing with graduate students who really want to understand the paranormal. We do a deep dive. We get into the metaphysics of it. Sometimes we get into the quantum physics of it
Cool.
and the philosophy of everything. We also have to understand that whereas my grandparents had to do this by themselves, you know, yes, they read books, especially my grandfather. He really looked up to a British ghost hunter named Harry Price, who actually came to us after he died and told my grandmother that he would be watching over me for the rest of my life because he felt I was going to be such an important part of the paranormal world.
Wow.
I thought that was amazing.
That's awesome.
Um, yeah, yeah, I've had some unusual experiences.
I'm
Actually,
sure.
I'm working on the autobiography now,
Oh,
but
nice.
I'm sorry, I've
No, you're
lost the
good.
thread of this conversation. What was the question again?
You were talking about how you teach, sometimes touch
Oh, yes,
on
yeah.
quantum physics,
So I
metaphysics,
teach
that
one-on-one,
idea.
but I also teach at two different universities online. Truckee College, I'm offering a course in the fall there. Also, University Magicus, which is an online school. But
Mhm.
I live in South America, so it's hard to have face-to-face conversations with people in person. It's got to be
Sure.
like this, like you and I are having.
Sure. Wow. That's that I watched an interview with you from 2 years ago, and you'd mentioned that you were in South America in that interview. I thought maybe you were just on locate, like on like a case or something. Like,
I've lived in 101 places around the world.
wow. Wow.
Yeah, and in 9 days it'll be 102, and
Wow.
then we're going to be back in Paraguay,
That's
Asuncion.
awesome. Wow. You talk about so all of the different things you teach. What made you decide to start teaching more about this? Was it because there's so much misinformation and untrained quote unquote ghost hunters who really have no idea what they're doing and dabbling in worlds they shouldn't go into, and you wanted to educate more? What made you decide to go that route?
Well, it's pretty much the same reason I started the foundation, which was I was looking at all of these stupid paranormal shows on TV. I was watching the videos on YouTube and elsewhere, and I was appalled. I mean, truly disgusted. If you did half the crap that I see on these videos, you would get yourself in serious trouble. And I felt education is the key. I'd grown up with terror. Obviously, if your
Sure.
grandparents were
Sure.
walking around calling themselves demonologists, your awareness of what might be in the dark is a little different.
Yeah.
And combine that with the fact that I was also a psychic, and my mother, father, and grandparents were not getting along.
Hmm.
So I was not given any guidance at all. So I grew up in terror, and I know the power of fear. And I want to educate people because 9 times out of 10, what they're afraid of is not anything they need to be afraid of. You know, you hear footsteps in the hall at night and then a knock on the door. I promise you, it's not the devil. The devil's not going to knock. It's probably the old man that lived in the house or your grandmother. Just, hey, I'm here. I'm just checking on you. You know, and I tell
Yeah.
people, even if you see something like a cup fly fast against the through the room and smash against the wall, the thing you have to keep in mind, first off, judge it by what happened. Did it hit anyone? No. Great. Recognize that spirits don't have fine motor control. If they get up the power to bam, hit something and make it fly, that's fantastic. That's unbelievably powerful for them. They really had to be focused and trying to get your attention. But it's almost always harmless. You know, the picture falls off of the wall. Maybe it's that person trying to get a hold of you.
Hmm.
You know, I
Yes.
actually had one of my favorite little ghost stories. And now this was not an actual spirit. This was something known as a residual haunting, which means that there's an impression left on the place, a psychic impression.
Yeah.
And every night, this was a friend of mine. Every night at 10 o'clock at night, her and her family would hear the bedroom door open upstairs. They'd hear footsteps come down the stairs. The kitchen door would open, and then an air popcorn maker, which they did not own, would start. And they would hear popcorn popping. Then they'd hear the kitchen door open, close, and footsteps go upstairs. Every night, this
Hmm.
old man that had lived there, that was his routine. He would go down, make himself some popcorn at 10 o'clock at night, and then go back and watch some television.
Huh.
And it left an impression.
Interesting. And I've heard a lot about like imprints and impressions where, you
Mhm.
know, something that was a very like common thing or something that somebody just absolutely loved in that location is kind of, would you say kind of stuck in time or just like kind of like a
They
re
call
like
it stone tape theory.
okay.
The idea being that harder objects will retain residual energy.
Okay.
But I don't agree with that particular theory by itself. I need to research it a little better because when you look at places like Gettysburg, that's
Yes.
not rock, that's dirt, which is soft.
Yeah.
And yet there are tons of residual hauntings there, as well as real hauntings.
Mhm.
It's when you have a residual haunting, it's not just a repetition of activities, it's the emotion behind it that matters. The man I was just talking about had tremendous satisfaction every night getting his popcorn. That was his happy time.
Yeah.
But you'll also hear like moaning in dungeons and the clanking of chains. It doesn't mean there's actually a poor spirit still stuck on the wall. It means that there was such a traumatic event there that it left a strong impression and
Gotcha.
that sensitives can pick it up.
Gotcha. One thing I feel find is really interesting that I didn't know until I really started really looking into your history and your stories. You got started in 1980. You were 16,
Mhm.
which means Ed and Lorraine were still very active when you got
Yeah.
involved. I was always under the impression that you continued their work after they passed away. I had no idea that
Oh,
you
no.
I had no idea. What
No,
was the
they were only 52 when I got
yeah.
started.
What was that conversation like when you went to them and told them you wanted to get involved and start
That's
doing
not
this?
how it happened.
Well, tell me about it, how it happened.
No, I didn't have the choice in the matter.
Okay. Well, tell me about it. Tell me about that.
Well,
What was that
first,
experience like?
I'm going to shock your listeners by telling you I don't like the paranormal.
Really?
Yeah, I don't at all. It offends my sensibilities. Um, it used to fascinate me, but now all I care about is helping people. That's my focus. I don't believe I'm going to have the answers that
Mhm.
will truly explain everything to me. I think we need to have the unified field theory and quantum physics before we start understanding how these energies get manipulated. Things like Reiki, for instance, they are used in that's used in American hospitals today. I shifted my focus from trying to understand the paranormal to simply learning new techniques of dealing with paranormal problems. And that's been very effective. It's why I'm in the world. I travel around the world learning how different cultures deal with their manifestations of the paranormal. Because what I've seen is negative entities, what we call negative entities, they are culturally and spiritually specific. They manifest according to our belief systems, which says more about us, I think, than it does about whatever these things supposedly are. And that's true also when you look at things like elementals. Don't get me wrong, I've got people who work with elementals and they are very effective. But elementals are shaped by your own perceptions and your own belief systems. I think there's a lot more going on there than we're aware of. And that's also true for cryptids. There are hundreds of thousands of different types of cryptids around the world. Is it possible? Is it honestly feasible that there are that many unknown creatures in our world that we've never been able to get even a glimpse of? Not even once?
Right.
It seems to me that these things are created by us. They take on a life of their own. They do become what we imagine them to be, but I still think that the energy is coming from us. I keep talking in recent interviews about a particular experiment that I recently saw where they took a log and they shaped it a little bit like Nessie in Loch Ness.
Sure.
And then they took a smaller one, same shape exactly, and put it in a smaller loch nearby. At the smaller loch, people see it and they think, oh, it's a log. That's all. But in Loch Ness, about 10% of the people saw it and they're, Nessie! Because they saw something they couldn't understand.
Mm-hmm.
And their mind had to find a way to explain it. And that perception is something that I'm fascinated by because I keep seeing how our brains will change what we see to fit something our brains can accept.
Right.
And I think that's the same thing when you're looking at these things that we call demons.
Mm-hmm.
In a Hindu family, you're not going to get a Christian demon unless that Hindu family has moved into a Christian household and something was left there by the previous tenants. That happened in a case in Australia where originally it was an Indonesian family, I believe, and they had summoned spirits to protect the land. But when they left the spirits there. And the Australian family that came in was having problems with these spirits.
Oh God. Oh,
Yeah.
that sounds. Oh my
But the thing
God.
is, you got to understand, poltergeist is the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
My very first case when I was 16 was a poltergeist case. And it's one
Mm-hmm.
that I will have to admit I don't have an explanation for. Normally, I can find the underlying issues that make a person vulnerable to the paranormal. You know, maybe they're dealing with domestic violence or some trauma in their past. But that's the thing that we also have to deal with so that we're strengthening them so that they're not going to get haunted again, or if you like, repossessed. Uh, by the way, I am an exorcist who doesn't believe in demons. And I have only done or assisted on about a dozen in my entire life. In my 44-year career, I've only done 12. They are incredibly rare. And nobody should jump to the conclusion that what they're dealing with is really that bad.
Mm-hmm.
I unfortunately can't tell you how many times I have people contact me and say, I have a demon in my house. Or worse yet, I think I have a demon in my house. I'm like, if you had a demon in your house, there'd be absolutely no question in your mind. You know, it would be obvious.
Yeah.
So no,
Yes.
it's so rare. Whatever
Mhm.
that thing is that takes on such destructive proportions, it is rare. I've had 2 cases of possession where the men both died. It is deadly. It isn't something to be taken lightly. It's why I don't believe in paranormal unity. That would be like, somebody who really loved the TV show ER saying, now I want to be a brain surgeon. Okay, here's your scalpel, go practice. No,
Yes.
we're dealing with real people's lives.
Yes.
I if somebody comes to me and they're really fascinated by the paranormal and they want to get into this work, I'm like, that's very nice. Are you doing it because you're fascinated or because you want to help people?
Yeah.
Both. Great. That's wonderful. Keep in mind, though, this is dangerous work and you're really dealing with real people's lives. Now, I'm a pastor as well. But I guess after I've just told you that I'm an exorcist who doesn't believe in demons, I guess this will come as no surprise. I'm also a pastor who doesn't believe in any particular religion.
Okay. That's okay.
All right.
That's perfectly fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's
I
perfectly
think
fine.
there's a wonderful Hindu proverb that has guided me for a very long time. There are many paths up the mountain. It's only the fool running around the bottom of the hill saying you're going the wrong way that never gets closer to the top. We all have our own spiritual paths to God.
Mm-hmm.
Every religion, every place in the world I've ever been, if somebody's praying to God, he listens. He doesn't care what your religion is. He cares what your heart is. He cares about
Yes.
your faith in him. How you get that faith, how you express that faith, he doesn't really care as long as you're expressing it with love.
Yes. Yep. And that's a lost, unfortunately, like there's not enough people that really still believe that way and feel that way, unfortunately, which pushes so many people away from it. And I've always said it's not about anything other than what your heart says, how you feel inside. And, everybody has their own journey. It's between you and God, nobody else. And that's just what makes that so beautiful.
Well,
You know?
the one that sticks with me is, as you do unto the least of my brothers, so you do unto me.
Yes.
And the people that ignore that one simple commandment, it breaks my heart.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
We could change the world overnight. God gave us free will, and we could easily make the world better for everyone. We just don't believe we can. We don't understand the power of free will, and we allow other people to tell us, no, you can't.
Yep.
Don't believe that.
Yep.
With God, all things are possible. And yeah, all right, that sounded very preachy. Um,
It's the truth, though. Like,
I don't feel close to God. I know that sounds strange, but to me, I spent more than 50 years trying to understand the mind of God. I studied every religion I could find, including many you've never heard of. I was always trying to understand God's plan. And then NASA came out with a figure that blew my head wide open. They said that there are more living worlds in the universe than grains of sand on Earth, which, by the way, is the number 75 followed by 17 zeros. That's a big number.
yeah.
So if that's true, and if God created it all, then I've realized that the only faith is in his perspective, that I can't see where I'm supposed to be. I have to have faith he's putting me where I need to be, regardless of what happens to me, whether I die or not. I have to have faith that it's serving God's purpose. I'm not a Christian, but when Jesus was on the mount and he said, pray like this, our Father who art in heaven, he was not saying, memorize these magic words. He was saying, this is how you talk to God. Ask that he take care of your daily needs. Ask that he help you with God's plan, that you will be effective in God's plan, and that you will be forgiven the way you will forgive others.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, be godly and God will be with you.
Yeah.
But people need to understand when they're afraid or something, when they pray, they have to do it with intention. It's a dialogue. And also, faith must be put into action. Don't pray and expect that that's going to change everything. You must work toward it as well, whatever that goal is. The only time I find that prayer and ritual are effective by themselves as when I'm dealing with the spiritual realm. And then again, make sure as a researcher that you do not go in there with an ego. This isn't you that's getting rid of these things. It's God. And if you go in there thinking otherwise, your ego is going to push God out of the room. So that's another reason I don't like these celebrity paranormal people.
Yeah.
It isn't me. My whole life has been about helping others. It's never been about being famous.
Hmm. And I did want to ask, like, as growing up, how much of this world were you aware of? Were you kind of kept in the dark as far as what Ed Lorraine did for a living, or were you, it's right there? I mean, was it encouraged?
I
And what,
was 3 years old when I was first locked in the museum that night.
oh no.
Yeah, that was
Oh
bad.
no.
My sister
Oh
was
no.
too, and she locked me in there by accident, maybe. I don't
Oh
think it was by
no.
accident because she ran away laughing. Uh,
That's
I've got two
not,
sisters. One is Annabelle, and she's the nice one.
oh no. That is
But
not good.
no, but seriously,
Okay.
I started screaming, and my grandfather came running out of his office. He happened to be in the back. So that wasn't bad, but it left me traumatized. I knew exactly what I was seeing. I remember 1 year later visiting Lorraine's mom, and I used to go there all the time when my great grandfather was alive. And we spend the nights and everything. But he died when I was 4. I don't remember him at all. But I do remember that I was afraid to go in the house one night, and my grandmother was there.
Mhm.
And she said, I told her I was afraid of ghosts. She said, "Don't worry, honey, there's no such thing as ghosts." You lie, Grandma.
A few years
But no,
later,
I
you're like,
always
we
knew.
need to discuss this now.
Well, I was 4.
Right.
But
Yeah.
I it was always there. I mean, when I was in middle, no, even in elementary school, there'd be occasional newspaper stories or local news stories on the local channels. So I would be very excited, of course. Oh, my grandparents were on TV, and I'd tell my friends at
Sure.
school, and then they'd all make fun of me because I'm the weird kid whose grandparents believe in ghosts.
Right. And yeah, man, I feel like that isn't necessarily something that ever stops as you get older either, though, because there's so much skepticism when it comes to that. So, that's
I
the
don't worry
unfortunate
about
part.
that.
Yeah.
I
I don't
don't worry
either.
about that.
I totally believe in that world. I've had my own experiences, and you get to a point where you just have to just, okay, if that's the way you feel, that's fine. But you can't deny what I've experienced.
Oh, sure they can, and I'm not going to argue with those people. Come on, how many people say bad things about my grandparents, for instance? It's everywhere,
Hmm.
and it always has been around. They've always been called fakes and everything else, or just in it for the money. But they would drop anything to help someone, and I've never made any money on this work other than $25 for a class that I
Right.
teach. That's about it.
Right.
It's not like I'm doing this to be rich. I have a pension, and that's good enough for me.
Hmm.
That's how I live.
Yeah.
But I don't care if somebody doesn't believe. As a matter of fact, I think it's better if they don't believe.
Hmm.
Uh, Too many people get hyper focused on the paranormal and want to blame everything on the paranormal. I don't think
Yeah.
that's healthy.
Yeah.
If you are a skeptic, you've already got a wall up between you and the paranormal. Have you ever noticed? I don't know what your experience level is, but when you go into a house with a family that's being bothered, it's always the father who's the last to admit that there's anything going on because
Yes.
men are more rational. They're not allowed to feel as much as other, like children and women do. And therefore, they're not as open to it. Everybody else is feeling and sensing everything going on around them, but he's supposed to be the rational, logical one. And it takes overwhelming evidence before they break down, the men.
Hmm. Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't worry about that. That's a great defense for them. All I care about is when you're somebody who is in trouble, you know where to come for help. That's what I care about.
Yes. Do you do you feel like even or after all of these years of doing what you do you still like do you feel like you're still learning?
Oh God, yes.
And how important is it to continue to still learn?
Well, that's why I'm in South America. I've lived everywhere and I'm constantly learning. Anybody who tells you they're an expert on the paranormal is lying to themselves or to you or both. The truth is, we're just scratching the surface. We've been studying this phenomena for 75,000 years. Neanderthal, we're putting people into graves with ochre and flowers and other things, trying to appease the dead. They were already getting a sense of power that was there. And hunter gatherers, they created witchcraft because they were learning about the power of nature and how to use it. That's where animism comes from. Uh, it fascinates me how long we've been working on this and how little we understand. I know the phenomena exists. I simply don't have explanations for it. And I'm not willing to fall back on religious doctrine simply because every religion tells a story that explains this, and they're all different.
Yes.
If you're going to study the paranormal, you cannot do it through a religious lens. You have to look for the commonalities across cultures, and you have to look for the differences across cultures, and then examine why would that be? And the only answer I've been able to come up with is we're the ones manifesting these inhuman entities. Ghosts? No, I deal with ghosts all the time. I talk to them. They're people. You know, I treat them like the living. They're exactly the same to me. I don't fear them. And by the way, for your audience, how many people do you pass in any given day? How many of them are trying to kill you? You know,
Not as many,
ghosts
not
are the
hopefully
same,
not as many as we might like to think, you know.
or fear. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But ghosts are the same thing. The most you're going to have to deal with is a ghost who's either very confused or very frightened themselves. They don't know what's happened to them. They're in denial. They don't want to pass over, maybe because they are afraid they're going to go to hell or something like that. And it takes some therapy basically to help them to cross over, to help them understand that there's nothing to be afraid of and that they will be welcomed on the other side.
Interesting.
So that's a big part of what I do as well.
I feel like you mentioned it a couple times. I do feel like more people are focused on the why and an
Mhm.
explanation instead of a solution and an end game. Like they sometimes I feel like you just aren't going to understand why this is happening instead of okay, I'm not going to understand why it's happening, but how do I make it stop happening?
Exactly. Exactly. That's what's important. I mean, I don't have to understand how cancer is created as long as I know how to cure cancer. Not that I can do either. I'm just saying. Yeah.
Right.
And that's what should matter is results. We should be focused on that. And it shouldn't be I'm looking for my 5 seconds of video so I could put it on TikTok and get a million views. No, you have no idea the damage I've seen done by these teams who come in, some of whom are very well meaning, but they're ignorant as hell. And they bring in somebody who they consider a psychic. The psychic feels heavy energy, and they're like, oh, it's a demon. We can't help you. And they run away. And now that woman or man or whomever
Yeah.
is terrified that they're dealing with something demonic.
Mhm. Now they're worse off.
Unbelievable. It's so much worse. I had one poor woman who was traveling to Georgia every single month to pay $600 for a deliverance every month. Turned out she just was a poor woman with out of control psychic abilities. She was a wide open medium. We got her into our psychic support group that we have online. We've got about 1,000 members. And she got the help she needed, the guidance she needed, and she doesn't have problems anymore. You'd be amazed how often the issue really is the person is too talented and has never had any
Hmm.
help in dealing with it. Sadly, and by the way, if anybody's listening here and you're a woman who is a psychic, If you haven't had any training, if you're not in control of your abilities, you might be suffering from anxiety or panic disorders. And oddly for the layperson, your stomach is going to be really screwed up. You're going to have either intestinal or stomach problems, very weird ones
Hmm.
sometimes. And that's because you don't know what you're doing. And I don't know why it's only women, but with spirit, all messages come through your solar plexus. So because you're not protected, all of that energy is coming right through your belly, and women get really, really bad stomachs. Oddly, I've noticed that most of the men who are psychic seem to be gay.
Really?
Yeah, and I only have a theory as to why. Now, psychic abilities are genetic. As far as we can see, there's a strong correlation between your ancestry and whether or not you've got any abilities. Uh, Obviously, I got mine from my grandmother and from her mother, and probably lots of others. Um, but most men who are psychic are gay, and I think that's because they have to be hyper vigilant about their surroundings. Being gay can be dangerous, no matter where you are in the world. So they're already hyper aware.
Hmm.
Plus, gay men are allowed to be more sensitive and more feeling,
That's
which makes them
really
more in tune with the things around them. Yeah, most of the men that I've dealt with who were very good psychics were homosexual.
hmm, interesting. That
Yeah,
makes a lot
I
of
thought that was
sense then.
very odd. I had
Yeah.
no idea at
Huh.
first. It took a lot of time to meet a lot of them.
Interesting. So you mentioned earlier that, which I think is really interesting, you don't necessarily like the paranormal. You like
No,
helping people.
yeah.
How does the rest of your family, your parents, brothers, sisters, how do they feel when it comes to this world? Are they similar or do they stay away from it?
My
Like,
mother is terrified of it. Everybody's heard of why she calls herself Judy Warren. I don't know. Honestly, Warren isn't even our name. My grandfather's name was Warren Edward Miney. He didn't like the last name and he didn't like the first
interesting.
name. So he took his middle
Interesting.
name as his first and popped the other one as his last
Huh.
name. But
Interesting.
yeah, now I guess maybe for publicity she's going with Warren. But yeah,
Gotcha.
that's my mom. She
Gotcha.
hates the paranormal. She's never ever wanted anything to do with it. For the life of me, I'll never understand why she allowed me to go on a case when I was 16. But my grandfather was so sick and tired of my being afraid of the dark at 16. When I was 14, they started taking me on lecture tours. And I
Okay.
got to see my grandmother do some amazing things. But when I was 16, he took me on my first case. And then he
Okay.
made me sit upstairs in the darkened master bedroom while the whole house is shaking from pounding going on. And there's clawing in the wall behind me and growling. And they're downstairs trying to use religious provocation to piss this thing off even worse. And I'm sitting in the dark for an hour. Cramps, I hear this. Okay, Chris, if you hear anything else, let us know. What else?
This is only the beginning. This is only the
Oh, and
beginning.
it got far
Yes.
worse. By the end of the night, the
Wow.
woman had been clawed down her face. Two hulking black masses walked down the stairs. A pot with church incense in it flew around the corner straight at my head, just missed me, hit the window behind me. The pot flattened, and the window didn't break. The lights were going on and off. I got out of my chair to run to the front door because the woman screaming she wanted out, and I thought, yeah, that's a good idea. Oh, and we were on the radio the whole time, live on WTIC AM radio 1060 over the phones. And as I'm running to the front door, and the door wouldn't open, the recliner I'd just been sitting in comes across the room at me, tumbles across the room at me. The lady and I got out of the house, leaving my grandfather on the phone, just talking. Oh yeah, yeah. There's this happening and there's that happening, and it's like. But I'll be honest. That night when I went home, it was the first night in 16 years I went to bed without the light on. I felt for the first time I wasn't afraid anymore. My grandfather had given me an absolute baptism by fire, and I will thank him till the day I die for that.
Yeah. The only thing my grandpa got me exposed to as a kid was pro wrestling, and my mom's mad at him for that. So, because I'm still in it to this day. So, not exactly the same thing. But man, so I mean, when your first case is that intense, it's got to make it, I would assume it makes it easier to go through those as you go, especially so young. How has your how does how has your experience dealing with fear changed and evolved and gotten easier over the decades?
Oh, the only thing that scares me is my son. Worrying about him.
Mine too. Yeah, I
Yeah,
feel you.
that's about it.
Anybody with a son can relate to that, I think. So, yeah.
He's 24. He's already got a child, and I'm like, okay.
Oh
So
man.
he's got a 6-year-old child. Like,
Oh man, mine's
yeah.
three and just tried to climb the house. So
Oh my
yeah,
gosh.
yeah. I
No,
climbed. Yeah,
mine was an angel at 3. Not so much anymore, but yeah. So that scares me. But honestly, paranormal, nah, hasn't bothered me since then. And the haunting in Connecticut, that case.
hmm
By the way, the
yes.
book is called In a Dark Place. If you own it, please do me a favor. I'd like you to light a nice fire and throw it in. It
Really?
is the worst. That was the book that convinced me to get out of the public eye.
Okay.
I lived in that house for 9.5 weeks straight, and I took detailed notes, moment by moment notes about what happened in that case, handed them to the author, and he ignored it completely and made up a
Wow.
ridiculous story that just embarrassed me. So no,
Gotcha.
I've got nothing but disdain for that or
Yeah.
the movie. It was the only movie I've ever walked out on in my life.
Gotcha. And that's the movie where they found out it was where the funeral they had
It was a
the
former funeral home.
with the eyelids, I think in
None of
the
that, whatever you're
I
talking
didn't think
about,
any of
is
that
not
was
true.
legit, but that's the movie that's the movie and book you're referring to.
Yeah,
Right. Yeah.
yeah.
Gotcha.
Like I said, I left after 45 minutes. If there was something
Gotcha.
about eyelids, I gave up and walked out
Yeah.
before that.
I don't blame you. I mean, it's I did want to ask about that and touch on that a little bit when you see all of these movies depicting the cases and even your grandparents, how does it make you feel and maybe the rest of the family feel when you see them depicted on TV movies? Is it frustrating? Do they ever consult you at all? Like, are you
Not
ever
me.
involved? Okay.
Not me. Now,
Okay.
my mother and her husband are in charge of all of that stuff.
Okay. So there
Her
is
husband
someone.
has wanted to be a famous man his whole life,
Oh,
and now's his chance. So more
gotcha.
power to him. He can enjoy it. Um, he actually never worked on any cases. He was always the guy that turned the slides at my grandparents' lectures. But anyway,
Gotcha.
no,
That
they're the ones that arranged for the movies to be made. They worked with, I guess, Warner Brothers, sold the rights
mhm.
to my grandparents' lives to them. But my grandmother didn't get much out of that deal,
I didn't.
unfortunately.
Yeah, and that I hear too many cases where that is the situation where, the
Yeah.
person who it's about doesn't get anything out of it. Um, how accurate are the
Oh, terrible.
depictions? Okay.
Don't I liked the first Conjuring movie? I really did. I thought it was great. The second movie, ridiculous. I was appalled. There's no connection between Amityville and Enfield, England.
It was a
My
really
grandparents were only in
weird
Enfield.
connection.
Huh?
It was a weird connection for them to make in that movie. They didn't even Amityville had nothing to do with anything else in the rest of that movie. I was really confused of why they
Yeah.
even included it in there. Like,
Because it was so famous and because they wanted to create the monster known as Valak, the nun.
eh.
By the way, my grandparents never dealt with something called Valak. They never had a painting of a nun. None of this is all made by James Wan, the
I
director.
figured. I figured.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I haven't seen the third Annabelle movie because the idea that my mother is psychic just is ludicrous. And I was 3 when Annabelle came home. My mom was my mom. She wasn't some kid running around the museum. My mother has probably been in the museum 3 times in her entire life. She's terrified.
I would be
So no,
too.
and then there's La Llorona.
Yeah.
That's no, that never. My grandparents never had anything to do with that.
I was thinking about that one.
Um, yeah.
Gotcha.
Oh, I will say though, and even though Conjuring 3, all of the details are wrong, there was no witch involved. It was a Ouija board. Um, but one thing I loved about the third movie, the very last scene, where my grandfather, well, Patrick takes Vera out back with her eyes covered, and then shows her that he had bought her a gazebo. That really did happen, and it
Really?
is still sitting in the backyard of my grandparents' place.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah,
That
that
is
I cried. I cried
that's
when I saw that.
what makes you keep wanting to watch those movies? I mean, because
Oh, I
it's
don't.
for okay,
No,
okay,
I'm no,
okay,
I never watch documentaries about my grandparents.
okay,
I
okay.
I, I don't watch their old videos. Um,
Are
I
you
don't get me wrong. I love seeing my grandparents and all, but they visit me anyway, especially my grandmother. She's always around. My
awesome?
grandfather, since my grandma died, he's only shown up a couple of times, three
Okay,
times. Um, yeah, 3 times. But my grandmother, she's around all the time. She's been helping me and protecting me. I was under attack last year for 3 months, and I didn't want to believe that I was under a magical attack. I find the idea of magic intellectually insulting. I have to focus my head. I'm looking at directed energy. It's quantum physics at work on the macro scale. That's how I have to look at it. But it is real, and it does affect us. I was electrocuted. I had large bruises of the size of my palm. Here's size of my palm all over my body. And they would keep appearing. Couldn't figure out why. I went to the doctors. They couldn't figure it out. I couldn't walk. Things were breaking all over the house, and I wouldn't do anything. I was like, crap happens to people. It just happens. That's life.
yeah.
My grandmother appeared to 4 psychics on the same night, one Wednesday night, and two of them knew each other. The other two didn't know any of the others. And to each of them, she said, "Christopher is under attack. He needs to take care of it immediately. Please tell him." Every one of them came to me either that night or the next morning to warn me. I performed a couple of rituals to cleanse myself and then the house, and everything immediately was fine.
Wow,
Yeah.
wow.
So yeah, it can be dangerous.
Do you have to, when you have done investigations and on-site, you know,
Mhm. I've
have
done
you had,
thousands.
yeah, have you had to cleanse yourself when you get done? Or
Oh,
is there
before
stuff
and
you have
after.
to before, after, during, like, is there a process before and after you have to go through?
There's a lot. And people need to understand when you walk into a haunted location, go with respect.
Mm-hmm.
You don't go in an adversarial kind of position. And you first protect yourself and the people you're with. Then you ask permission. Now, if you're dealing with something negative, you're dealing with something where you've got to go in, regardless of whether or not you're going to get permission, then you state that you're coming in with respect.
Yes.
All right. It's also very important that you lay down rules for spirit. Every single religion in the world, every single culture in the world has different ways of dealing with spirits and laying down rules, but they all work. When you tell a spirit, these are my rules, more often than not, they will respect them. Not always. They still have free will. But if you're forceful about it, if you're strong about it, just like you were talking to a normal person on the street, most of them will respect your boundaries.
Interesting.
I, I, well, let's see. I've had so many times where like the TV will turn on or
Mm,
the door will be vibrating because something's trying to get my attention,
right.
or I'll hear running on the ceiling back and forth, and I know that my ceiling doesn't have anything above it, and
Right.
like, enough. You will stop now. You do not have permission to bother me,
Hmm.
and it stops.
Interesting.
Now, you can also call on God and say, by the power of Jesus Christ, I command you to be gone. You do not have place here. I do not invite you to be in my home. That's fine too. And that will be even more powerful. You're calling on God's power. And if you're a psychic and you're constantly being pestered by spirits, lay down rules for them. A lot of people think they're haunted, but psychics, their aura burns very bright, much like a lighthouse in the darkness. You know, an ordinary person, their light is like a flame, like a candle. But psychics attract spirits all the time. So it's not that they're haunted. It's just wherever they go, they're constantly attracting spirits. So every single day, they've got to find a way. I teach people all the time how to do this. They have to find a way first how to protect themselves morning and night. I teach them how to ground themselves and get rid of that excess energy. Sorry, something just popped up on my computer. There we go.
You're good.
I also teach them how to. What on earth is going on? All right. I teach them how to use either obsidian or onyx or tourmaline combined with clear quartz. That helps to ground their energies as well, so they're not as open. But then every single day, they should state their rules for spirit out loud, because spirits are coming and going all the time.
Mm-hmm.
My way of doing it is I say, when I light a white candle on the kitchen table, and when I tell you, no, I'm available to you, that is when you can come to me. When that candle goes out, we are done with our session. You may not follow me. You may not pester me when I'm at work. You may not pester me when I'm sleeping or eating. Only when that candle is lit. And you do that every day.
That's smart.
And that will usually be enough to keep the spirits at bay.
That's really smart. I never thought of that. That is really smart.
Well, that's for psychics. That's not
Sure.
for your ordinary person.
Well, no, but
You
that's
know, you
really
walk into a
interesting.
house where you just got a lost spirit, a lost ghost,
Mhm.
and maybe it's, you know, throwing dishes around or something. It's very confused. We had an old man in Newtown, Connecticut. He had died. He didn't want to give up his house.
Mm.
And so he stayed. And family moved in. He would shove the table across the room. He'd open and close the cabinets in the drawers in the kitchen. He'd throw the plates around. My grandparents tried everything to get this guy to stop and to calm down and let the family live there. They couldn't do anything. Family had to leave. This was
Oh,
in the
wow.
70s. And they sold it to a sporting goods store, and they still had to close the store at sundown because otherwise all hell would break loose.
Huh.
Eventually they gave up and they bulldozed the whole thing down, and they've built either a CVS or a Rite Aid on Route 25 in Newtown to replace
Interesting.
it. And they haven't had any activity since. But
Okay.
yeah, sometimes a human spirit can be extraordinarily focused
Gotcha. Is
and
there,
cause some harm, but not deadly harm.
what in that situation, was there a risk that even the house was bulldozed and something else was there, that there could have still been activity on the property?
Yes. Yeah, there that does happen. You know, we hear about people, for instance, seeing a ghost floating in midair. They're not floating in midair. They're standing on the second floor of a building that we can't see anymore.
Oh,
So
okay.
that's why we see it that way. Yes, it
Okay.
can happen.
Okay. Gotcha. I mean, as much as I love scary movies, I like the documentaries a lot too. And I recently saw one that you were in. How often do you agree to do the documentaries, and how often do you decline to do them?
My job is to promote the Warren Legacy Foundation.
Mhm.
We've got over 100 volunteers around the world helping people. I'm willing to do any podcast, any appearance that will allow me to tell people that we're here to help. Now, that's our job. Part of our job is education. That's why we have got our YouTube channel, the Warren Files. There's tons of good information on there. We're not the kind that get into sensationalism. Of course, we'll talk about the cases and we'll talk
Sure.
about them in detail, but we're going to give you an analysis of those as well. I want to
Hmm.
educate. I don't want to titillate, you
Yeah.
know?
Yes. As long as it's for the right reasons and they have the right purposes in mind to, for what it's going to be talking about. That's the
Exactly.
important thing.
Yeah.
And for me, with my past experiences, when it comes to this subject at all, it's best to approach it with respect and
Mhm.
positivity.
And
That's
a
the most
very,
important
very
thing.
open mind, because
Absolutely.
everything you've been taught is probably wrong.
Yeah. I do want to ask. I mean, I'm just genuinely curious. I know there was a museum at one point.
Still
Where
is.
is there still? Where are the items and the artifacts from the room that they
It's
had,
still
or the
there in the
museum? Is
same
it still
place. It's at my
there?
grandparents' house in the old artist
Okay.
studio that they had.
Okay.
But you got to understand, I hate that it ever was called a museum. It was never open to the public
Okay.
except by special invitation. And
Okay.
today, that's not even allowed.
And
Um,
I don't think it should be because
no,
some people are not prepared for, the power that is in that room or on if you don't too many people approach this world with the funny haha, I'm gonna poke fun, be disrespectful, and you just they completely just underestimate what can actually happen. And so,
yeah.
like, as fascinated as I am, I don't know if I would ever want to see any of that up close because I don't know that I'm prepared for it. I don't.
Yeah, until you go through that baptism of fire, you don't know.
Yeah.
But I think that fear is a negation of faith. It says, yeah, I got faith, but not that much. To me, I know I'm going to die. Everybody should know and accept they're going to die. It isn't about having faith that God's going to save your life. No, you're going to die. What matters is, did you do what you needed to in this life? That's what matters. And I have faith that my life will matter. And when I do die, okay, that's going to matter too. It's going to be a lesson for somebody.
Mhm. If people want to reach out to the foundation and genuinely get help for whatever
Mhm.
they're dealing with and going through, how can they do that? And also, if somebody wants to get involved and become part of that foundation, is that also a possibility?
Absolutely. Now, it's really hard to get into the foundation because our clients come first. We're
Mhm.
not taking people without experience. We Our focus is on who we serve. That's always first. But
Yeah.
if you're in trouble, or if you are a serious researcher, if you're a professional, if you're interested, go to warrenlegacyfoundation.com, click on the contact us link. There you will find a Google form for asking for help, or also a Google form for applying to the foundation. You can also reach out to me personally, Chris McKinnell, on Facebook, or you can go to the Warren Files on Instagram. I'm also reachable there. And as I said, if you want to learn, please go to the Warren Files on YouTube. If you're interested in one-on-one classes, also, please absolutely give me send me a message. I'll be happy to work with you.
Yeah. I mean, and that's one thing that I am genuinely thankful for and impressed by is you are surprisingly easy to get a hold of and talk to.
I'm just a
Um,
guy. I'm
yeah.
not.
I was absolutely blown away by, how nice you are, how down to earth you are. Um, Genuinely
But
appreciate.
let me put it in perspective for you, okay?
Yeah.
And stop saying such nice things, will you? Shush. Uh,
I'm from the
in the
Midwest.
eyes
It's
of
what we
God,
do.
but to me, in the eyes of God, we are all flickering little fireflies, all equal, and nobody is on a pedestal under His eyes. So no, I have a hard time when people want to say really nice things, because I'm no different than anybody else.
I I couldn't have said it better. We're all on the same level. We're all here for the same reason. And Chris, thank you. Thank you so much for doing this today. It's been absolutely, I honestly learned a lot that I did not know. I truly appreciate you taking time out of your day to do this. I can't thank
Oh,
you
it's been a
enough.
pleasure. Thank you very
Awesome.
much, Reggie. I've really enjoyed spending the afternoon with you.
I appreciate that. I'm sure we'll talk again soon at some point. Good luck with everything. and stay safe on your next move.
Well, Paraguay is very safe.
Yes.
I'm going to be fine down there. I lived down there last year, so other than
Awesome.
magical attacks, I didn't really have any problems.
Uh, awesome, man. Thank you so much. Have a great afternoon, and we'll talk again soon.
God bless you. God bless your listeners.